And now I want to welcome Matthew Ray. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Thank you for coming online with us today. We're going to talk about what is woke.
So my name is Matthew Ray, and so I'm an elder just over the bridge at Eastminster Presbyterian Church. So one of the good liberal churches. So how many of you all have spent time in the waiting room recently? You can kind of show a raise your hand if you've been in the waiting room lately. And I certainly have. I was there last week for a doctor's appointment, just a regular checkup. And if you notice, the TV is almost always on a certain channel, especially in this area. Perhaps one that begins with an F and ends with X. I'm sure we've seen that. So, have you ever tried to change that channel and then received looks of shock and horror? Like, oh my goodness, he's changing the channel. And I can't have my Fox News on. I have, but I do it anyway. I consider it my duty to humanity to make the air just a little bit less toxic. So have you noticed, perhaps you're like me, you've noticed that the term woke somehow manages to weave its way into a lot of the news segments that you see on certain channels. Um, in some form and fashion, it's in a lot of the different kinds of conversations. And you can if you look at the expression of the person who's talking about it, it usually gives you an indication of how they feel about the term. So in the case of Tucker Carlson, if he looks like he's eating some bad clam, then he might be talking about the word woke. So this brings us to today. So I finally decided I needed to take a deep dive and see for myself what the term woke actually means. There's a proper context and get the origins and the history and what that might mean for us today. So the Merriam-Webster definition of woke is aware of and actively attentive to important facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice. Wow. So let's take that in. The term is actually a positive term. And of course, I was aware of this a little bit. I wasn't familiar with the term really in this context, but I knew that it was being misused by a lot of folks. So in my research, I found a few things. One of which is that nearly every major world religion, from Eastern to Western, all across the globe, contains teachings that would qualify as woke. So starting with the Bible, we have Micah 6:8, which I'll read to you from the Inclusive Bible translation. Listen here, mortal. God has already made abundantly clear what good is and what the Holy One needs from you. Simply to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your Creator. The Jewish Talmud puts it a little bit different, a different way. And he or she who turns away from the works of love and charity turns away from God. So in both Eastern and Western religion, the term woke really applies to calls for justice externally, but also to the idea of internal transformation and what we would call awakening, which is where the word woke comes from. So that happens, of course, naturally as we, in our lives, as we learn and grow, we become awakened to things. Much as when I wake up in the morning, I become awake, woke to the fact that my cat is sleeping on my head. So things like that. Or I'll become woke to the sound of cars going by, people leave for their morning commute, things like that. So even in the most conservative, this is something interesting. So even in the most conservative expressions of religion, especially evangelical Christianity, which oftentimes the folks who are so critical of wokeism or being woke, even in their own documents, they rely heavily on concepts of transformation and awakening. Um, in the Southern Baptist tradition, the idea of being born again is something that comes to them, and that's also an important meaning of awakening. So, and and back in Presbyland, the term for our equivalent of hope is sanctification, which is just a fancy word for becoming awake to what God is doing in the world and in us, and the transformation that happens in each of us as we move through different stages of life. So the term woke is often used by pundits to push back on movements which seek racial justice and reparations, as well as other forms of activism. So, which brings me to how the term woke actually came to be. So it has its origins in African American vernacular English in the 1930s. So Black American folk singer and songwriter Huddie Ledbetter, aka Led Belly, used the phrase "stay woke" as part of a spoken afterword to a 1938 recording of his song Scottsboro Boys, which tells the story of 9 Black teenagers and young men who were falsely accused of raping 2 white women in Alabama in 1931. In the early 2010s, it came to be used in reference to other racial injustices of the present day, such as the case of Trayvon Martin and others that came after them, and even most recently in Jacksonville, with the shooting there, as a reminder to stay woke and aware of what's happening around us. So something that's interesting, going back to historical texts such as the Bible. A friend of mine who's a UCC minister once told me the Bible is so woke that there are almost no white people in it. And I say this to people and it blows their mind. But if you think about it, in the Middle East, there were a lot of black and brown people. There were not a lot of people who looked like me in that time period. So that's something that's very interesting. The stories that came out of people who just look exactly like me. So that kind of brings me to what we can do now. So I saw a shirt the other day, actually at the Pride Parade, that said "Woke and Proud." And I was originally going to get the title for this, but I figured it'd be good to put it in towards the end. So, what does it mean to be woke and proud? So, I've been thinking a lot about what we can do to kind of take back the term and make people aware of its true meaning and understand why it's important to be woke. So, I had a conversation with the individual who was wearing the shirt. Of course, I ordered one on Amazon. We'll see when it gets here. But the idea that we should be proud of being compassionate, proud of being people who care about other people. We live in a society that is increasingly self-centered and self-absorbed. So we tend to focus on our own needs before the needs and wants of others. We pursue policies that are destructive, that benefit us in the short term, and of course wreak havoc on the environment. And I think that's something that would qualify as something that's important, and something we should be addressing. So, kind of going back to I really liked one of the readings that we did earlier. So if I woke up tomorrow and didn't have a belloc, as long as I have my part, I can get it all over. So this is something that kind of goes to that self-centeredness. So we should be people who freely give and care about others, even if we have to sacrifice in the short term, even small sacrifices, that we care about other people. I think that's part of what being woke is. So, and I'm going back to the opening words that we had. It talks about being called to um, to deal with these issues like LGBTQ rights, homophobia, um, homelessness, racism, all of this. And so, in my opinion, I would change the shirt to call to be woke because in in the in all of our different faiths, in a lot of different faith traditions, we see we see this idea of being called to transformation, being called to transform the world. So we should that would perhaps be a better way to say it than Wilson Crowd. Um, but called to make a difference in the world, I guess is a better way to say it. So things that we do, things that you do. So at the congregation that I attend, we are what's called an Earth Care congregation, which means we make a commitment uh, to our Creator and to the environment that we are going to do certain things and engage in certain behaviors that are earth friendly. So we use recyclable, compostable cups and other materials as opposed to using styrofoam. We have timers and motion sensors in our light, and we may be putting in a solar system in the coming year. So things that your congregation, the Unitarian Congregation for South Boulevard, has done, putting solar panels in the roof, being in a wonderfully wooded environment that is not invading the property, but the building is part of the property and it works with it, which is wonderful. As opposed to having a big parking lot and a giant building and green space. So other things that we can do is both of our congregations were at the Pride Parade, and it is remarkable, and this comes back to that wonderful woman that I ran into, who was several. There's one lady who was 93 years old, and at 93, she walked in the parade, and she was there. She was there actually with one of the I believe one of the vendors. I'm not sure which one. It wasn't a church related one. It wasn't faith based. It might have been for one of the schools or something like that. But the way she put it to me, she quoted Maya Angelou. She had this great quote, and that is, she had a great quote from Maya Angelou that was related to age, and I think it was really fascinating. So basically, it says, age is nothing. Waking up is everything. So this is something that I always tell people, being awakened to, our calling to be woke is something that can happen at any age and stage. So, and then she, another quote from Maya Angelou related to this in the same, I think it was an interview, was, at 50, I began to know who I was. It was like waking up to myself. So not only waking up to what's going on around you, but waking up to yourself, being who you are. And I think that as we become who we are, we can help others become who they are and to see the value of people who are different than them. I think that's really what the essence of being woke is, an awareness of yourself, an awareness of others, and an awareness of our call to rectify the injustices that we see when people are denied their humanity, as either LGBTQ people, as people of color, as immigrant communities, people who are all human beings, but are marginalized, oppressed, and left out of society in different ways. So that's something that's very interesting to me. So that's what I have. So does anybody have any thoughts or comments to add or experiences with when people misuse the term woke and how we can own that? What are your thoughts?